All right, so in probably Joe Biden's most unsurprising move of his presidency up to date, he is officially going to be expanding our already massively inflated military budget. So let's go ahead and read some good reporting here from Public Citizen, and then we're going to talk about how absurd and ridiculous this continuation of American imperialism in our bloated military budget continues to be today. So, following the news reports that President Biden's preliminary fiscal 2022 budget will increase Pentagon spending above fiscal year 21 levels, Public Citizen President Robert Weissman released the following statement, quote, "It is disappointing to see the Biden administration increasing Pentagon spending even $1 above the excessive, wasteful, and dangerous level inherited from the Trump administration. With so many pressing demands facing our nation, the last thing America needs is an increase in Pentagon spending, any increase in Pentagon spending. As the administration works to finalize its budget proposal and Congress moves to adopt a budget resolution, it is important that the bloated Pentagon budget be reduced from current levels. The Pentagon budget, which jumped more than $130 billion during just the Trump presidency, is replete with spending on overpriced weapons that don't work. We just saw the recent story of the F-35 program where the U.S. government literally wasted $1.7 trillion, almost the full cost of Biden's recent COVID recovery package. $1.7 trillion on a failed fighter jet program. So that's just one example of what they're talking about there. Rip-off deals for private contractors with these no-bid contracts where basically the military-industrial complex gets to fleece American taxpayers for some of these weapons deals that the U.S. government is giving them on gigantic investments in pointless or outdated weapons systems and waste and mismanagement so severe that the agency cannot pass an audit. It is indeed a tribute to the power of the military-industrial complex. So as they point out there, just another important point that people somehow never bring up in these conversations, the fucking Pentagon, okay, every government agency for the most part has to pass an audit to prove, hey, what are you spending this money that we're giving you on? The Pentagon cannot pass an audit, okay? They've tried to do multiple audits and it has failed multiple times. They can't even tell us what they're spending the current amount on, and they are asking for billions and billions of dollars more money every single year, okay? They cannot even pass an audit. They can't even justify the current levels of spending, let alone justify increases in spending. But of course, that's what our politicians who are owned and controlled by the military-industrial complex are going to be doing. I mean, Joe Biden obviously nominated the board member of Raytheon, okay, a literal board member of one of these weapons defense contractors, to lead his Department of Defense, to lead the Pentagon in Lloyd Austin, okay? This is a guy who got direct payouts from Raytheon, a company that is basically designed to profit off of our wars. So this is exactly something that you would expect from somebody like Joe Biden, an imperialist, and somebody who is continuing in the military tradition of past U.S. presidents. He finishes off here. There are hundreds of billions of dollars to be saved by appropriate cuts to the Pentagon budget. What is most important for the fiscal year 2022 budget is that it be smaller than the federal fiscal year 21 in order to signal that we are finally moving in the right direction and shifting resources from the Pentagon to investments in the people. So yeah, investments in the people. I mean, this budget coming from the same guy who said that he would veto Medicare for All over its price tag. Veto Medicare for All. So by the way, this is an entirely false premise. Medicare for All is cheaper than our current system. We currently have the most overpriced and ridiculously inefficient system in the entire world. But he still says we can't even hypothetically support it over its price tag. This same guy now wants to increase our already absurdly inflated military budget. $700 and whatever billion dollars a year. But he wants you to also believe that we can't afford to give healthcare to all of our citizens. We can afford to bomb infrastructure overseas. We can afford to bomb innocent civilians overseas in these endless wars and these endless campaigns, but we can't afford to give our own people healthcare. That is the world that Joe Biden wants you to accept, and it's not one that you should. And look at this. I mean, this is just, we see these types of graphs all the time. Okay, U.S. spending on our military compared to the rest of the world, and it's important to understand graphs like this, visualizations like this, as we are seeing the massive ramp up recently of propaganda that is supposed to, give or give pathway for the United States to increase our military budget. Propaganda against China and Russia and ramping up this escalation and tensions between the two countries. This is all the United States knows how to do. We only know how to beat people into submission with our military. And so as we see rising economies like China, the United States government is trying to demonize them, and there are fair reasons to criticize and demonize Russia and China. But the US government is trying to propagandize alongside the US media ecosystem. It's trying to ramp up a new Cold War that they are trying to use to justify continuing this inflated, clearly absurd military budget. There's no way that you can look at this and think that we are not the greatest threat to stability around the planet instead of China or Russia or any of these other countries. Okay? So as we see the increase in the propaganda surrounding Russia and China and these other global powers, understand we cannot afford to fall for these same Cold War tactics that will justify further military spending increases, okay? So that's just one point. But here's just another point on some of the other damaging effects of our military. US military emits more CO2 than most countries. Our military is producing more pollution than most countries on the planet. So this is, again, not just about national security. It's not just about foreign policy. It's also tying into all of these other issues as well, which the United States continues to refuse to address seriously. Over 800 military bases around the world, okay? Just as a comparison, 800 military base sites estimated at around 80 foreign countries and territories. 80 to 90% of the world's foreign military bases are owned by the United States. Russia has about 10 to 20, and China about 1. So just as a comparison there, okay? The United States is operating military bases all around the world, right up on the borders of Russia, right up on the borders of China. Can you imagine if the opposite was true? I think this entire conversation around who is the aggressor in these circumstances is always funny, because the United States is somehow always the victim. We're always the ones playing defense, even though if you go and look at the maps of where our military bases are sanctioned, who's spending the much money on producing an army ready for war, it's always been the United States that's been the aggressor historically. So don't fall for the propaganda, this new Cold War 2.0 that they're trying to sell us on to justify increased military spending like this. It's absolute bullshit, okay? We are the aggressor. We are the overspender on military budgets. And this has real material consequences. Again, we saw the effects on climate, but it also has obvious effects in regions that we have destabilized around the world. Hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of civilian lives lost due to our military campaigns, even in just the Middle East recently. So these are the types of things that we have to end right now. We have to be turning in a different direction and understand that even if you're looking at this from like an imperialist point of view, our military is not the only avenue for building power. There's something to be said for building economic power by just investing in your own citizens and investing here at home and maybe giving reparations to some of the countries that we have destroyed. But investing in just our military is not the way you build sustainable power. It's how you get us into World War III, okay? So this is a direction that we absolutely have to change. It's unacceptable that Biden is proposing an increase to military spending, even though our Pentagon can't even justify the current levels of military spending. So it's not something we should accept. It's not something that progressives in Congress should accept. I remember that Bernie Sanders proposed like a 10% cut to the military budget, and it got easily voted down by imperialist Democrats and imperialist Republicans working together. But that's the direction that we have to go, okay? There's no excuses for it. Just because it's not politically easy or just because it's not politically feasible right now in Washington, D.C. with all these corrupt politicians, that doesn't mean that that is a fight that we can concede. Okay, our military is doing immense damage overseas. We're wasting infinite sums of money. And all the while, we have politicians like Joe Biden who are telling us we can't afford Medicare for All. We can't afford basic social welfare programs here in the United States and actually take care of our own citizens. But we can somehow afford the endless wars. We can somehow afford the endless inflated military budget. So don't fall for the Cold War propaganda. And don't fall for this bullshit proposal that Joe Biden is putting forward. We have to oppose this